All right, welcome back, everybody. So today we're going to go ahead and shift gears once again and dive into the world of Django. We recently finished PostgreSQL, and now we're going to shift over to our backend and see how our Django can work with our database um, and make the models that we've been working on these past week through our backend and connecting it with um, our front end. So Django, what is Django? I'm sure you guys have heard the word multiple times. I was asked recently, what is Django and why do we use it? Well, essentially, Django is a open source web framework that was created in Python, and it is designed to make web development easier and faster, right? It is often called a batteries included framework because it comes with a lot of the built-in functionality like ORM, which you're going to hear a lot today, which stands for Object Relationship Manager. Django also has a lot of cool features like authentication and even an admin interface that we can interact with. Right? Django overall, it provides a set of tools that enables us to focus on writing unique parts of our application without handling all of the low-level details. Right? So Django, it provides ORMs, authentication systems. It gives us a way to create URL routings, and it even provides some security features already pre-built into Django, right? And you might wondering, why do we use Django? Well, Django, if I'm correct, was created somewhere around 2005. And before Django, developers often had to write custom code and create essentially boilerplates for each part of their web stack. So they had to create SQL queries where they would embed their code, and it would make it hard to maintain, and it would expose security vulnerabilities. When it came to the URL routing, the URL management was very manual, and each route had to be explicitly coded, increasing the development time and the error rates. The authentication system had to be custom built, which meant repeating the same security logic in every part of a new project, right? So Django essentially is able to do a lot of this with just the framework itself because it comes with the pre-built tools. Today, we're going to be diving into Django by creating a new project. And with our new project, we're going to be able to create applications and tie them in together and see how they connect. We're going to be able to create our applications to the project, as well as linking our database with Django. We're going to see how we can create models that are going to interact with our database to create our tables. And finally, we'll talk about the Django server and the admin interface. Do I have any questions so far about what we are learning today? All right, if I have no further questions, let's go ahead and dive into our first part of today. Our intro, Django and Django ORM. So we have a nice little slideshow here. So we talked about Django and why we use it, essentially being a backend framework for Python. It's going to allow us to create a RESTful API with CRUD capabilities, which we will dive into later throughout the week. And for Django, one of the things that we want to do is essentially use a virtual environment. I'm not quite sure if you guys have already been exposed to virtual environments yet. I'm pretty sure you guys were, correct me if I'm wrong, Adam. But essentially, virtual environments are containers that we wrap around our project to ensure that whatever we install inside of it stays within that virtual environment. Can anyone take a guess of why we would want to use a virtual environment when working with Django?
That way you can keep track of your dependencies that your project has, and you're not pushing those dependencies up to GitHub. So you add those to your like git ignore, and then or I'm thinking about this wrong, but a little bit, but it's just a way to keep track of the dependencies.
Uh, yeah, I mean that's a good guess. James.
Yeah, I have a question.
O-
Once
Okay,
you answer this,
okay, sure
yep.
thing. So essentially, when working with new projects, depending on the project that you're working with, you're gonna have to install different um modules that will that your project would depend on. And a lot of times these installations might be different versions. And it's good to be able to track what your project is depending on. And at the same time, you don't want to install stuff into your computer that you don't need unless it's specific for that project. So virtual environments allow you to kind of keep everything you're working on within a little container and it stays within that container,
But
right?
you're still installing that onto your computer, right?
Yeah, but it's just contained in one local area, right? So if I were to install something within like my virtual environment and I try using it somewhere else without that virtual environment being active, it's not going to be tracking that I have that installation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
James, go ahead. Ask your question, please.
I think the slide is answering my question. So we created virtual environments called default. We won't have to create multiple virtual environments. We just separate through the project. So like how I got project 1, 2, and 3, but we'll stay under the same virtual environment the entire time, but we would separate it through projects. Is that correct? Or do we
Uh,
need multiple virtual environments?
well, typically, uh, depending on the project, you might want to have your own personal virtual environment for that individual project. Different projects might require, uh, different installations of different stuff. And depending how old that virtual environment is, you might have like an outdated version that your program is dependent on. Um, for example, when I created my very first application, and I tried to run it later on with different versions of my installations, I was having issues because it wasn't tracking the version of the dependencies. So I had to kind of go through and figure out how to fix those issues with my installations. Typically, it's good practice to maybe create a directory where you can store all your virtual environments so they stay in a local area. You can kind of use them from there. That's what I like to do because it keeps it organized. And we'll see how we can do that today as well. All right. Do I have any questions on virtual environments?
Sorry, just one last question. That project 1, 2, and 3, were those separate environments or were they falling under that one Python virtual environment?
This specific virtual environment, it seems to have three different projects. I believe, let me correct that. It looks like we have three different versions of Python here. So it might be three different virtual environments. If I'm correct, I didn't create the slide, so I'm not quite sure exactly what this image is depicting. Maybe Adam can correct me here. But I would assume these are three different virtual environments due to the fact there's three different versions of Python here.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
Good question, James. Thank you. So the Django setup. Let's go ahead and take a pause here and we're gonna move over to our VS Code. And we're gonna talk a little bit more about the actual virtual environment and how we're going to create that. So I can assume that you guys do not have a background in virtual environments. And essentially to create a virtual environment, we're going to use the following command, which can be Python -m venv, which stands for the virtual environment, and it's going to be followed by the name of what your virtual environment is going to be. Can anyone take a guess of what M is?
Module.
Module. That's correct, Owen. So what we're going to do is essentially, which I recommend for you guys to do as well, is to create a virtual environment in a specific location. This is what I like to do and I recommend. So you might want to create a directory at your root and call it ENVS. And I already have one like that. I can kind of show you where it's at, where I have it in my root directory here. And I can go into this directory and show you all the different virtual environments that I currently have worked on. And by running that command, you're going to create that directory at your root level, which we could then use to create virtual environments within, and then activate it from there. Let me go back to where I was. Due to the fact that I already have it. And from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new virtual environment using the command that we have here, which is going to be Python -m env. And I'm going to call this, I already have a Poke environment that I used earlier, but I'll do it without the dash. So Python -m for module, virtual environment, Poke env. But because I do have the directory, what I'm going to do is add the path for it. So it'll be the squiggly line, which I still haven't learned a name for, /envs /poke env. And this will create a virtual environment in that directory that I had created earlier.
I have a quick question.
I haven't answered.
Wouldn't you want your environment to go with your project? So like the same directory that your project is in, that environment specific to that project.
You can. That is definitely an option. Like I said, you can either have it within where your project is located at, or I personally like having it in its own directory. Whichever one works for you guys.
Gotcha.
If you do make it in a different directory, make sure you have a good naming convention for it, so you know which one you're using it for. But if that's not your style, that's fine. I would make it in a specific directory where you want to create your project at.
Thank you.
And this should have created, if we look at my ENVS directory, I now have the Poke env environment that I created 30 seconds ago. And now to activate this environment, we're going to use the following command, which is going to be source, followed by the name of your virtual environment, bin activate. If you do have the virtual environment in a different directory, make sure you add the file path for where that's located at. And for me, it will look something like this, where I use source, the directory of where it's at, my Poke env /bin /activate. Let me actually create a different directory here where I can make my project. I'm going to make my, let's call it Django, we'll call it Poke project. Poke project. I'm going to go into my Poke project, and then I'm going to activate my virtual environment. The source, ENVS, the name of my Poke environment, bin /activate. And on the left side, you'll see here that my virtual environment is now activated. Do I have any questions on how to activate your virtual environment?
Yeah, so you made that new Poke project directory within the environments directory, right?
Negative. So I'm currently right now within the curriculum
Yeah.
copy that I have. I created a Poke project directory where I'm going to be working on the demo for today's instruction. I went to that directory, and when I was in that directory, I went ahead and activated my Poke environments.
Okay.
All right. In the event that
In
you would
regards to
like,
the,
I'm
oh,
sorry, go
sorry,
ahead,
one sec.
Juan.
In the regard to the environments, I'm assuming after multiple different projects, you're just going to have them all just sitting there. How do we go about deleting them? Or when do we know when we should delete these? And how much memory do they take up? Is it even worth it to delete these?
I'm gonna be completely transparent with you with the memory. I'm not quite sure how much memory the environment might take. If you find yourself that you are running out of memory and you want to delete some environments, there is a command where you can find all your environments. Let me see if I can get that command for you. Um, Essentially, you can find all these environments and delete them. After you locate them, you can use something like find, and I want to say like type, and then you want to say like name, and looking for it has like bin in it, and it should, I guess it should be /. Okay, there we go. It's starting to find the environments I have. All right, so we see here these pop up. I'm not exactly sure what all these extra files are, but it was able to find some virtual environments that I do have. As I told you earlier, I do have them all within a specific directory. So they're all located within my envs, but notice that these are school venvs/bin, and it's able to find all my virtual environments. I did find a bunch of extra stuff that I don't need. Let's clear this up. I think if I want to get a more accurate location of it, I can do line, say type C and then name bin. Okay, this gives me a little bit less stuff, but still a lot. But yeah, you can do a quick Google search to see how you can find specific files within your directories, find all your virtual environments, and then do a remove, -rf to remove the virtual environment if they're scattered everywhere. Or you can do what I did, which essentially I just moved them to a directory so they're all consolidated. Does that answer your question, Juan? Awesome. So we are currently within my Poke project directory. I have created a virtual environment for my project and I activated it. Notice that you can also deactivate your virtual environment in the event that you are done by just typing in deactivate, and that'll turn off your virtual environment. Notice that the Poke env is no longer present. I'm gonna go ahead and again, so we can move on with today's lesson. Now, starting a new Django project. Well, we now have our virtual environment and we can now move forward with the installation of my Django and my pip. So these are, I think, out of order. I would say to first ensure that you have pip install and it's updated. We can run pip install. Install it and ensure that the most updated version of pip is currently in my virtual environment. And now to install Django, it's going to be a simple command of pip install Django. It goes through the process, downloads Django, and the installation was successfully completed. If I run the command pip freeze, I can currently see right now everything that is installed within my virtual environment. Notice that I do have Django already installed. Are there any questions of how we installed Django or pip?
starting the Django, that's gonna put you as the admin. That's like a role thing.
I'm sorry. Can you say that again?
For right here, for starting the Django project, that tech admin part, that's saying that you are the administrator, right?
The Django admin, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yes and no, but that's not necessarily what it's saying. Let's actually run that command. But that was the next part of the class. We're gonna go ahead and run this command that comes with Django. And it's going to give us a list of different commands that comes with admin, or that comes with Django. And we can see here some very helpful commands that are going to be useful to us throughout our time with Django. We have stuff like dump data and load data. This might seem very familiar to you guys when it comes to JSON. We have a make migrations command. Right now, this is a little bit foreign for you, but we'll be utilizing this to essentially create records of the different models that we create so we can move them into our database, as well as the migrate command. And then we also have these two very helpful commands that we will be using right now. That's called start app and start project. And the Django admin command is essentially the command that we utilize to create new projects. Think of when you're working with React and you wanted to create a new Vite project, how we create that Vite project, and then you went through the process of selecting what type of project you want to use, the language, and so on. That is what Django admin does for us and how we will utilize it. Now, the command that we are going to focus on right now is going to be the start project command. And this is going to allow us to create that new project for Django. So within our terminal, we're going to come down here. We're going to say Python -m for Django. I'm going to say start project. After start project, I'm going to name what my project is going to be called. And I'm going to call this the Pokédex _project space dot. Now, what the dot does, it's going to create a project inside my Poke project folder, and it's going to create a new directory for that project. I believe if you don't add this dot, what's going to happen is going to create a project at the same level where Poke project is located at. So you might get some weird functionality if you don't add that dot. All right, so that dot will essentially create a nested folder. And we can run that. And what we see here when we open up Poke project is that we now have a Poke project folder and a file called manage.py. Where is my stuff? Now, there are two commands that we can use. We have the Django admin command, and there's going to be another one that you will see in a second. Let me see where I can use documentation. So the current window that I have open right now is the Django documentation. Django is open source and has a very thorough and extensive documentation, which can feel a little overwhelming for beginners. But if you ever want to look for something or have questions about how something works, I highly recommend to kind of parse through the documentation because it is very well written. Now, in regards to the Django admin command, you're going to see that we're going to use two different ways of doing stuff. You can do it with the Django admin, or we can use the Python -m Django. Now, which one you use is honestly personal preference. Both of them will work. The one that we just used was the Django admin, which created our Poke project. Correction, the one we used was Python -m for Django. But the one that we're about to use is going to be the Django admin, which is going to also start our Poke project. So notice how these both create a project for you, but they look a little bit different. Either or both of them will do the exact same thing. They will both create for you a project within your command line. And this is how your project should look like. You should have your root folder, which for me was Poke project. By using that dot after my Poke project name, it created a nested directory of the project name that I called, as well as a manage.py file. So as you may have noticed, we do have this manage.py file. Let's go ahead and see what this manage.py file has. Well, there's not much in here, but essentially what the manage.py file is going to be running our main script that's going to allow us to run a lot of our commands to do everything that we want to do within our Poke project. Now, we are going to come down to our terminal and we are going to create an application. We have our project, but we have no apps within our project. So to create an application, what we are going to do is run the following command, which is, where is it at? Python manage.py start app Pokemon app. So we run Python and we're going to utilize that manage.py, which is going to run our application with the start app. And start app will create an application for us within our project. I'm going to call this app Pokemon app. Now you might be wondering to yourself, why do we have start project and start app? Well, the best way of thinking about that is honestly, as a refrigerator, we have a ice cream here, a refrigerator ice cream. The ice cream itself is our Django project, and the ice cream refrigerator has different ice cream containers. These are applications. Each container has its own type of flavor. So we can have one project, which is the entire ice cream refrigerator, but we can have multiple applications within this project. So the ice cream refrigerator here in this scenario is our overall top level project. Applications themselves are our ice cream containers. Right, these are our flavored ice creams, our applications. Do I have any questions in regards to the project or the application? Well, let's look at our Pokédex project. Within our Pokédex project, we have a couple folders here. We have our init folder, our ASCII folder, which we're not really going to use too much. We have settings, URLs, and a WSGI. You won't be touching that either. The one that I really want you guys to focus on right now is going to be our settings.py. And our settings.py is going to be where we essentially set up our project. This is what's going to connect our project to our applications, as well as where we are going to connect our database, and honestly just configure the overall settings for our project. Within here, you can see we have a secret key that goes for our development. We have installed applications. Notice that the installed applications already have some pre-built apps that come with Django. Django has an application for admin, which is going to provide us with an admin site. It has an application for authorization, as well as content types, sessions, messages, and static files. We have middleware, which you don't really have to worry about. Templates to how our projects work. And then we also have a section for databases. Notice that it already comes with a default of SQLite, as well as some additional content for authorization, password, and validators. And what I want to focus your attention on is going to be the installed apps. Well, we currently created our Pokemon app, but our Pokemon app is currently not connected to our project. And the way that we connect it is as simple as coming to our installed apps variable, adding a new line, and adding Pokemon app within installed apps. Excuse me, I burped. And this is going to connect our Pokemon application to our Pokédex project. Do I have any questions on how we install our applications to our project? Yes, Jacob.
I mean, I understand that we're installing the apps within the project folder. I'm just still trying to wrap my head around like where the virtual environment is in relation to all these apps and underneath the project. I'm hopefully you could clarify that for me. I'm just trying to understand what goes where as far as like setting up a lot of this. Just give like a quick rundown.
Yeah, let's go ahead and open up TL Draw. And I'm gonna go ahead and create a square here. And what this square is going to represent, it's going to be my virtual machine. All right, this is my overall virtual machine. And within the virtual machine, I might have different things installed. I might have different directories. And I'm currently working on a new application. Well, the virtual environment allows me to create a certain spot within my virtual machine where I can isolate where my project is located at as well as what's installed, right? So instead of installing Django and other installations, which I can just start naming off like Cycle, PG, right? REST framework, which we'll talk about later on. We're gonna take a bunch of different installations in here. Instead of installing all these extra stuff within my overall virtual machine that I might not need that can interact with other stuff, what I would like to do is maybe isolate these locations or these installations to a certain location. So by creating a virtual environment, I essentially create some kind of a container within my virtual machine. Right, I create an isolated location within my virtual machine inside of this virtual environment. Think of it like a glass dome where nothing else is really touching it, right? It's like a black canvas, a blank canvas, or like a sandbox, right? It's a little area, a little pocket within my virtual machine that I can kind of work within. And instead of installing this in my virtual machine where everything else can have access to it, I install it in my virtual environment, so it's isolated within this container. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
All right. So now when I create my project, all right, my project is in my virtual machine, but by creating a virtual environment and activating it, what I do is I allow my virtual environment to be able to use the installations that it has in it to apply to my Pokédex project. If my virtual environment was not active, what will happen will be that my Pokédex project will not be able to work as it should because there's certain things that I have installed that my Pokédex project depends on. So which is why we activated that Pokédex virtual environment. That way our project can use the installations that we have installed, like Django, followed by Cycle PG later, REST framework, and different stuff. Does that make sense? Hopefully that kind of gave you a better picture of what the virtual environment is. It's honestly just a container that where we can isolate everything else at. Make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. I'm not the best at this. English is my second language, so I am trying. All right. So we have our apps installed, and something I want to do before I move forward that I didn't really talk too much about. I showed it, but I didn't move forward with it, which was the pip freeze. And what the pip freeze does, it shows me the current installations within my virtual environment. Well, I want to make sure that I'm able to keep track of what this virtual environment holds and honestly what my project is dependent on, right? In the event that maybe I like to share this somewhere with somebody, put it into maybe some kind of version control or move it. I know what dependencies my project has. And what we can do is create a record of the dependencies by using pip freeze. We use this greater than, and I'm going to dump these dependencies into a requirements.txt file. And by running this command, what it's going to do is going to create a text document for me, and it's going to add the dependencies on there. And when we run it, we see here the .txt file was created. I can open it up, and it has a record of everything that my project is currently dependent on. Right? And why do I do this? Well, if I decide to add this project into some form of version control, which we know like GitHub that we utilize here, what I'm not going to do is load up my entire virtual environment into my version control. So what does that mean? Well, if I decide to, if someone else decides to use my project, they won't have the dependencies that my project is relying on because the virtual environment currently lives within my virtual machine. Well, this requirements.txt provides that person a record of what my project requires, and then they can use that to install the dependencies into their own virtual machine so they can run my project. Does anyone have any questions about the requirements.txt? Well,
Yeah, I have a question.
Owen, send it.
So you want to store that in your Pokemon app directory, or does it really matter as long as it's in the project?
It is currently within my Poke project directory. It's not in the Pokédex project. It is the same level as everything else. So if I were to add this entire project into GitHub, I would also add my requirements.txt, right? I would add my project, right? This directory, Pokédex project. I would add my applications, my manage.py file, as well as my .txt file. So all this will go into GitHub. What won't be going up into GitHub will be my virtual environment, right? So once again, if someone tries to clone my repository, they want to use my project, they want to use what I created, they won't have the virtual environment that has these installations. Well, for them to know what my project needs, I provide them with a document that provides the dependencies for them. So what happens is they essentially create a clone of my project into their computer. They're going to want to install what's within here. So what they'll do is they will create their own virtual environment within their computer, right? And then they will run the pip install. They'll do -r for, I believe it's recursive, and they'll do requirements.txt. And I kind of run this here, but I don't think it's going to install anything because I already have the dependencies. We'll see here, I run it, and it says requirement already satisfied. Right, it tried to install everything within my requirements.txt file. It couldn't because it already has it. But essentially, that's what the requirements.txt does for other people who try to use my project. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Do I have any other questions about requirements.txt? All right. So we talked about setting up our Pokemon application into our Pokédex project by adding it into the installed apps. We already created our requirements.txt file. The next thing I want to cover is connecting my database to my Django project. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and open up another terminal here. And I'm going to connect to my Postgres. And let me see what databases I have in here. I currently already have a Pokédex database. One, because I already did this class before you guys. And two, because I was messing with it. But what we can do is we're gonna go ahead and drop that Pokédex database. So we ensure that I'm starting with a clean slate. I'm gonna say drop database, Pokédex DB. And then I'm going to recreate it. So now my Pokédex database is created. Let's double check. I can do, oh, my bad, /D, and I see that I don't have any relations. My Pokédex database is good. And now to connect my database, I'm going to go back to my settings.py where I configure my settings. And I'm going to go down to the database section. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to edit the engine and the name. Well, we currently have a default, which is SQLite 3. What I'm going to do is I'm going to remove SQLite 3 from here, and I'm going to type in PostgreSQL. Afterwards, I'm going to edit the name by removing everything that's within here. And I'm going to add the name of my database, which is Pokédex_DB. And that's going to connect my Django project to the current database that I have. Right. Django is made, it's able to work with all types of different databases. It has a default, but it's as simple as deleting and editing the engine and the name so it can work with other versions of databases. Do I have any questions on how we connect our database to our Django project?
Yes, can you do multiple databases at the same time, or you will always be modifying that default, switching out the databases?
I don't know. That's a great question. This is a dictionary. I can only assume that there's probably other databases you could probably add. I've never had the situation where I had to use multiple databases. So maybe I'm not the best person to answer that question. But I don't see the reason why you would want to have multiple databases for that. Does that answer your questions? I'm sorry.
Yes, it's fine.
That is a good question. Maybe a quick Google search for that, but I don't see the reason why you would have that. You know, typically, just like we have here, like, one table should belong to like one type of field. You would want to do like one database belongs to one application, right? You would want to have everything centralized. I can see being an issue if you have to manage different databases.
But it's common practice for one project to work with one database.
Correct. I've never seen it where we have multiple databases. Right, so we have our database, but currently Django doesn't really know how to work specifically with PostgreSQL yet. As I mentioned to you guys earlier, Postgres is created so it's able to talk to different types of databases, but every database is slightly different, right? And PostgreSQL has a specific way of talking when it comes with Python. And the way that we do that is via CyclePG. Are you guys familiar with CyclePG? from previous lessons or no?
Yeah, we used it in our Flask.
Okay, awesome. So you guys already have an idea, right? So essentially, CyclePG is an adapter for databases to interact with Python code. And we're going to want to use CyclePG so Django knows how to interact with our database. So back to the terminal where we have our Poke project and our environment. You're going to install CyclePG. And you're going to run the following command of pip install CyclePG, open and close brackets, binary. So pip install CyclePG, binary. We're going to go ahead and install that. And now that we added a new dependency, what should we probably do?
Put it into
Update the
your
requirements.
Update
Yeah.
requirement text.
Absolutely. We have to update our requirements so we don't forget. For instance, pip freeze. I want to freeze it into my requirements.txt. And we come back here. We now see CyclePG binary in my the requirements.txt file. All right. So right now, as it stands, we currently have a Pokemon app. We have a Pokédex project. We have connected our Pokemon app to our project by adding it to the installed apps. We have our database connected. We have our database created, and we have the way for our Django project to speak to our database. Before I move forward, do I have any questions with anything we have covered so far? Yes, Gary.
Can I just see the requirements.txt again?
Yes. There you go, Jacob.
Yeah, as far as installing Django, like, are we able to, should we just install it every time we create like a new environment or a new project within that, like contained within there, or can we have it installed like within like our root directory? Does that make sense?
You can.
Like,
Keep in mind, Django is open source and is constantly being updated.
mhm.
If you install it in your root directory and you try to create a new project, eventually your projects, if you're not doing it within your virtual environment,
Mhm.
older projects are going to be dependent on an older version of Django, and you might not realize that some things might become obsolete or things might change, and you might have an issue running your project.
Okay.
So once again, I highly recommend create the virtual environment, install Django there, because notice here that in your requirements.txt, it tells you what version of Django it's working with.
Right.
So when you install, when you do pip install -r requirements, it's going to install the specific version that this project was created in.
Okay.
Right. So if you don't use the requirements.txt and you try to install Django with the most updated version, but this project was created a long time ago, you're gonna have issues and your project's not gonna run how you expect it to.
Okay. All right. Cool. Thank you.
No problem. Okay. I hope you guys are not feeling overwhelmed yet. So far, this is very familiar to React, right? Think about React when we created a new Vite project. It created a bunch of different folders. When looking at your directories, just imagine your Poke project, this directory I have everything in, that's my refrigerator, right? I have my Pokédex project, and what this folder really does and focuses on is honestly just the settings of the overall project, right? This project folder here is honestly just the settings. That's where you configure everything, where you connect it all. Think of like a game when you open up your settings window to change your sensitivity or your keys of how you move your character. That's what our Pokédex project is doing. It's just tying it all together. Everything else that comes afterwards, it's going to be different applications, right? These are your ice cream flavors of what you're going to be working on, right? In this situation, we currently have a Pokemon app. This is what's going to create our Pokemon, right? We might have a different app that could be Pokemon trainers. We might have a different app that could be like Pokemon food, different stuff like that, right? If we tie it in with Postgres, think of how like Postgres, we created different tables for like, employees, department, right? Cars, drivers. If I was doing that here in my Pokemon project, I would have a different app for all of that. One app would be departments, a different app would be employees, a different app would be drivers and cars. Does that make sense so far? Awesome. The manage.py is the tool that you use to run your commands. Think of manage.py as very similar to pSQL, right? pSQL lets us open up our database and connect to different stuff. It's a tool that allows us to interact with Postgres, right? It's a tool that allows us to open up like that little interface and do all that. That's kind of what manage.py is doing for us. It's like the main script, if that makes sense. All right. So now we're gonna go ahead and move forward with our Pokemon app. We're gonna go ahead and open up our app, and we're gonna see a variety of different files. We have our admin.py. This is referring to our admin site, which we will talk at the end of the day about. We have apps, models. We have tests to test our models. And we have views, which we will talk about later on within the week. What we are going to focus on right now is going to be the models.py. And this is where we will create essentially our schema, very similar to how we did in PostgreSQL, where we had a SQL file where we created our tables. We're going to do that here in Django through the models.py. Now to let me open this up. Sorry, I'm on the curriculum. All right, so create our model. So by default, it already has for you the Django.db import models. To create a model, we are going to want to inherit from the models class. And that's essentially what it is in Django. We are going to be working with classes. So we are going to say class. This class is going to be Pokemon. And it's going to inherit from the models class that comes from Django. We're going to say models.model. And we are going to use that class to actually create the fields for our Pokemon table, right? Or our Pokemon object, essentially, because it is a class. So once we start a class, we can start creating our Pokemon. We are going to give this Pokemon a name. And you're going to see it's going to be very similar to when we created our tables, but the syntax changes, right? Because Django has its own way of naming stuff, right? Before we did stuff like name is going to be like varchar. We said 255. This time we don't do that. We're working with Python, so the syntax changes. Right? So here we say name is equal to models dot char field. Right? Char field is the equivalent of varchar from PostgreSQL. All right, so we're going to say char field, open and close parentheses. And then here we're going to give it a max length of 255. And we'll talk about fields in a little bit. We can just walk through it real quick. So we gave it a name, and I'm going to give my Pokemon a level, which is going to be models dot integer field. And this is going to have a default of 1, right? Thinking back to Pokemon, whenever you find a Pokemon, you've never find a Pokemon that's less than level 1. Yes, 1.
Sorry, I just wanted to be sure. So there's nothing in your database. So we're doing this to basically create the values for whatever we're going to input. Is that right?
Great. So correct. Right. So if I do \d, there's currently nothing within my database. My database is connected. Right. It is, Django is able to speak to it, but there's nothing to tell my database yet, right? Thinking back to last week's class when we created our database, but there was nothing in the database until we ran our SQL file. That's kind of similar to what we are doing now, but we're doing it through Django. So we are creating our models, and once the models are created, we're going to see how the models are going to be used within our database. Does that answer your question?
So going off of that, just to add a little bit more onto that, so then I don't need to make the framework in Postgres if I'm doing this in the Django, for example.
If you're referencing creating a SQL file and doing all your tables and then the inserts, that is correct, right? We saw how we did it with just PostgreSQL. Now we are seeing how it ties into Django and how Django can do that for us, right? This is actually part of the ORM, the Object Relational Manager, right? Django allows us to interact with our database and do everything that we would normally do in PostgreSQL, but do it all within this one framework. And it obviously has its own way of doing it because it is a Python-based framework. So we are able to do what we did in PostgreSQL, but more. And we will see how that ties in and why we do it with Django. And how Django is also going to bridge the gap between our database and our front end. Does that answer your question, Quan?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
No problem. So we have something very, very basic here. We have our name and we have our level. And we will elaborate more on the fields later within today's class. But let's get this into our database. So going back to my terminal where I am within the directory of my manage.py, and that's important, right? If we want to use the manage.py tool, we have to be within the same directory of where it is located at. So within here, the way that we are going to add this to our database is by using Python manage.py, right? We are going to call that script manage.py. And then what I want this script to do is make migrations, right? Well, where am I getting this, Roger? Like you just pulled that out of thin air. I did not. If you recall the Django-admin, it was one of the commands that we have available to us. Remember, I did mention there was two ways of utilizing these commands. It was the Django-admin command or by utilizing our manage.py file, right? We are using the manage.py because that's how the curriculum is built. Either one, which one you use, doesn't really matter. It's personal preference, but we are teaching the manage.py while method, and we are going to do the make migrations command. So once again, we're going to say Python manage.py make migrations, and then we're going to run that. We see here within our terminal that a Pokemon migrations file was created, and it's saying that we created a model Pokemon. If we refer back to our directories within our Pokemon app, we now have a folder called migrations. All right, well, let's look at that. All right, we have this migration. It has an init file, which has nothing, but what does have something is the initial.py. So when we open that up, we see some information where it created a migration set to true. Currently, my apps have no dependencies. And then what does the migrations do? Well, it created a model named Pokemon, and then we can see the fields that are within my model. We have ID, name, and level. Now, notice ID. We didn't add an ID, right? If we refer back to our model, we only have name and level. And that's because Django automatically creates an ID type primary key. And it currently has to realize to false, but it will still increment. I don't know how that works. We could talk more about this later. But the point here is it creates that ID for you. You don't have to give it ID like we did in PostgreSQL, right? One of the reasons why we talk about ensuring that you guys create IDs for your tables is because Django is going to automatically create them for you. It's always good practice for everything to have an ID. That way we can reference them, and we can create those relationships. Right, so you created that ID, the name, and my level. But does that mean it's in our database? Well, let's see. If we do /D, we still did not find any relations, right? Make migrations does not add it to our database. What make migrations does is almost very similar to how GitHub does it, where it does add all or commit. When we do add all and commit, it's not essentially a push. It's not within GitHub yet, but it's almost like staged, right? The make migrations creates a migration folder, which essentially creates a record or a log of what changes you are making, and it gets staged for it to be sent to the database. Does anyone have any questions about make migrations?
Do we edit this file if we need to make any changes here, or do we go back to our models.py and make
That
edits?
is a great question. You do not edit your migration file. You can, right? It's made so if you wanted to, you can edit your migrations. I highly recommend you don't, because that's a very easy way to mess up your project, right? So if you need to make a change to your model, what you will do is you will make the change here. And then you will have to make migrations again to update the record of the changes of your model. Does that answer your question, James?
Yes, thank you.
No problem. All right, let's go ahead and close up the initial.py. We are going to go back to our database. And what we are going to do next is actually send it to our database. So we created the record of migrations. We have that log. It's been added and committed. What we're going to do is manage.py, and to send it to our database, we're going to use the migrate command. Another command that is given to us. If you need to see where it came from, you can use Django-admin and it will show you the commands. We press migrate, and notice it's going to go through a list of applying our migrations. A lot of these are foreign, and you probably don't know what these are. Well, these are the defaults that come with Django, right? Django, as you guys saw earlier on the apps that we had installed, we had stuff like authorization and admin, right? So Django already has some pre-built features that are added to your database the moment you make your first migrations, because it needs that for the project, right? That way we can have an admin site, we can work with authorization as well as everything else. Validators, and so on and so forth. All this is within authorizations. We see this is all for the admin. These are all default that come with Django, right? But at the very bottom, you see the ones that we created, which was the Pokemon app. Now we can come back to our database, and we can say /D, and we now have our database with our updated relations. Django is successfully talking to our database, and we added the Pokemon app. Notice that it created that sequence table as well, keeping track of the incrementations of our ID. Also notice that the Pokemon app we have, the Pokemon model is prefixed by the app. That's one thing to take note of. We don't have too much control of the name of our tables, but the way it does it, it gets the app that it belongs to, and then the model from that app. Then we can say select all from Pokemon app, Pokemon. we see we have ID, name, and level. We don't have any Pokemon here. And then we could do the same thing for sequence. Once again, the last values and so on and so forth, like we saw from last week. We do /D Pokemon Pokemon. And we see here our table with the columns, the types that our columns are, and the fact that there's a primary key. Do I have any questions about migrating into the database? Yes, Jacob.
It's kind of related, but it's just out of curiosity. Do it like you created this, this whole Django project or this whole project based on Django with an empty database. Is it more complicated to like have to do like the whole migration thing with already existing databases? Like do you have to take a lot more into account as far as like the process of migration? Does that make sense?
Not necessarily. It's just that because I've worked on this project before,
Mhm.
because I obviously have to prep before my lessons. I
Right,
already had stuff in there, so I didn't want to have like any conflicting data.
right.
If I would have done things differently, like maybe set the fields differently, gave them different values or constraints. That, for example, if I would have worked on this before and I created the Pokemon model already before and it was set to like not null, and I tried to add a field that was null in there, I might have an issue like,
Mhm.
oh, well, this is supposed to be not null. So I just
Okay,
dumped it for purposes like that, right?
gotcha.
But if, for example, if you had data in here, if you already create your table and somehow you drop your database, that make migrations folder, it has a record of your tables, and all you have to do is just migrate again. And
Okay,
because of the log of migrations, it's able to recreate everything from the beginning, just like you
okay.
had it.
All right, cool. Thank you.
No problem. All right. So we now have our database working. We see that our tables are in here. All right, so we created the migrations folder. We were able to keep track of our changes. What is next? Yes, James.
Um, sorry, can you go back through how you got everything to show up in your database? I must have missed something because I still do not have any schemas in my database after executing everything.
Did you run migrate?
Yes, I did.
Is your database connected?
I think so.
Ensure that within your settings.py file and your Politis project, you have databases, and you connected it just like this. It's the correct name of your database, right? There's no weird stuff in there. So it's actually talking to it. After you create your models, make sure that you run two commands. You have to run the make migrations and the migrate command, right? So it should look like this, right? So you have make migrations. That's going to do like your git add, git commit type of thing, right? It creates your migrations folder where it has a log of what models you're going to add. And once you're ready to send it to your database, you do manage.py migrate.
Well, I think I did all of that and it's still not showing up for me.
Okay. This is a
We
long
can talk
class.
about this
Yeah.
later. Yeah.
We can definitely go into a breakout room later and I can help you debug that. All right. I have a message here. Let me just open up the questions, make sure there's no one asking questions. All right. So back to our slides. So we talked about the setup, the way our directives are made, .env project applications. We talked about creating our database and getting them connected. We created our model, right? And notice that all this is part of the ORM features that Django has, right? It's able to create tables. That's part of the ORM features. It's able to use Python to create classes that can be made into tables that can talk to your database. Those are all features part of its ORM model, right? That sounds a little abstract. I believe that is the first part of the class. We're gonna go ahead and take a 10-minute break. I'm gonna go use let me pause here real quick, actually. We'll take a 10-minute break real quick. Class. All right, welcome back. So up to this point, we talked about Django and creating our project as well as our virtual environment and its dependencies. We discussed applications as well as setting up our Django project with our applications in a database. We talked about creating our models and making migrations as well as migrating our migrations into our database to actually talk to our PostgreSQL database. All right. Now we're going to go ahead and kind of slow down a little bit and go back to our models and talk a little bit more about our model fields, right? We were very brief with the fields. Now we're actually going to try to talk a little bit more about them. So the fields themselves, essentially think of your fields as components and the model itself being the bicycle, right? So fields are essentially all parts or components that can create an object. Once again, we are working with Python. Django is a Python-based framework, so it uses classes, very similar to OOP, where you create your data members. Those are what your fields are. So Django ORM provides us with some default fields that we can utilize to describe most components of an object. I'm going to go ahead and refer to the Django documentation. I cannot stress this enough. All right, so we have some content in the curriculum, but Django is so heavy with information that if you really want to learn everything about Django, you're going to have to find yourself referencing the documentation very often. Although it's a lot, it's very well written. And where I'm currently located at right now is the Django field reference, where we can find our different types of fields. We can go down to our what is this called? Our table here, and we can see field types, and it brings us all the way down to our field types, and it kind of lists off what we have. We have a different variety. Then we have auto fields, right? An integer field that automatically increments according to available IDs. You know, big auto fields, integer fields, very similar to like int or big int. They even give you what numbers fit in it. We have the Boolean fields, very similar to how we did Boolean as well in PostgreSQL. Char field, taking this for varchar. The max length, typically this is 255 for max length. You can go deeper into char field if you want to know more about it. We have date fields as well. Date time fields, decimals, and duration fields. So opening up our VS Code, back to our Pokemon. Let's go ahead and maybe add some more fields in here. We can say, we're gonna create new fields here. We'll say date captured, or we'll say date encountered is equal to models dot date field. And then we can give it a default. We'll say 2015 January the 1st. All right, so we're able to give defaults to our fields. We can use the date field type
Your year is too long.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. We can also say state, or we can just say captured. And we can make this a Boolean field where the default is equal to false. We can also give it a description. This one can be, I believe, is there a text field? We have a text field. I don't want to give this one a default yet, but we can say blank is equal to true. All right, so we can give it specific attributes like whether we want the input of this field to be true or false, or as in blank wise, or even no, right? And now the difference between blank and no is honestly of where you want to see the input, right? If you were working with your front end and you wanted one of the widgets on your front end to be able to not take any input, then you probably be a good idea to add blank is equal to true, allowing them to not add input into that field, right? The no typically refers to the database. How do you want your database to receive information if it doesn't have it, right? By adding no equals true, it will be no. If no is not added, if I'm correct, the database will interpret it as an empty string. So blank and no is going to depend on where you want to, of where the information is coming from or going, right? Blank is for your front end of how you want to receive information. No is how you kind of want to store the information. Do you want it to be no or not no? Right? We have other types, email field. If we had a, a student, right? Class student. We can say email is equal to models.email field. And what's cool about Django is that depending on the field, it comes with its own constraints already, right? So an email field, I believe it uses some form of validator where it's able to see if it's an email or not. And I think we can even edit that. So we can use email fields if you were making, what else do we have here? We fields, but there's a large variety of fields that you have access to. And if you want to see more about the fields, you can either check the documentation or you can even come to your Pokédex project. I believe it's within the PyCache. Where was it at? No. Is it migrations? There's a location for all these. I do apologize. Give me a second. Where was it at? I can't think of where I could find this, but the curriculum doesn't have a specific location for all these. Once again, highly recommend the actual documentation itself, where you can get the type of fields and what type of recommendations you can use. If I click source, it should take me to where it talks more about it. Oh, here, this is what I was looking for on my my fields on my program. Where is it at? Let's do control find. Email. There we go. I found it. I was looking for this. So all the email fields, I was looking for this in my project, but this is what's supposed to be in the code of Django. All the fields that it takes, Boolean, chart fields, comma separated integer fields, date fields, date time fields, IP addresses fields. We even have positive big integer fields, URL fields. So you have all these to your disposal. It's how you want to use it depending on your project. All right. When to use null or blank. So I talked about it briefly, but here we're going to go through a good amount of the actual fields that are provided for us and if they're good to use or not. When it comes to your text fields, like you see here, char, the char field itself, the actual text field, anything like string based, slug field is one of them. I believe I'm correct, slugs are strings that only take characters, numbers, dashes, and underscores. Email fields, comma separated integer fields, all these, it's okay for them to be no, right? But it depends on what you want to use it for. So essentially, if you're gonna set it to true, the no is gonna be true, then you want to ensure that you can do it with blank is true and unique is true. In that situation, you have to ensure that you put no equals true, because what happens is you might have some issues with the unique being not being able to be placed because you'll have multiple blank values. So if you decide to make a char field that you might decide to not receive input from the user, but you also want to make sure this field is unique in the event they do add something in there, then you have to make sure the no equals true, because when it's added into your database, if multiple people are putting unique values in there and these values are all blank, then they're going to have issues, because how are they going to be unique but multiple people are putting no text in these widgets. All right, so that's a good time to maybe use no equals equal true. Setting blank is equal to true, that once again, it's okay. And that's mainly for like how you want to receive information, right? So if you want the corresponding form widget to accept empty values, that's when you would want to set blank is equal to true, right? Empty values are stored as no in the database if no is equal to true, right? So keep that in mind. When it comes to file names and image fields, you don't want to set it to no. I'm not exactly sure what kind of issues it might have, but it's kind of like your rule of thumb. So file fields and image fields, blank is okay if you don't want to receive anything back from it, right? Very similar to how your char field, text field, or string fields in general interact. If you don't want to receive an image file from your form widgets, then that's okay to set it to blank is equal to true. For Boolean fields, it's totally acceptable. Same thing with blank. It's okay for integer fields if you want to do it as well. Once again, when thinking about no and blank, it's how you interact. Do you want your database to be able to have no values or not? And when it comes to blank, do you want to be able to take information or not? Right? That's the main difference between no and blank. Here are some more examples that you guys can look through as well, whether they are date time fields. These are okay to set them to no. Once again, if you are okay with having no in the database. And you might ask, like, well, when is it okay? Well, it honestly depends on how you want to have your database, what your priority in data integrity really is. If it's meant to be made that way, then all power to you. So it's honestly like a case by case basis of how you want to use data. Like, is this data that should be known, or should you always be receiving some form of input back from your database and you don't want empty fields? Do I have any questions on the fields, blank, or no? I know it can be a little confusing when it comes to no and blank. Yes, James.
I was noticing there's every time you put in a field, you almost always had like a default. Is that a good practice to do? I feel like it was like 50-50 in Postgres, whether we had a default value or not.
Yeah, if you put a default, I think it's good practice because one, your database won't be empty. There will always be some form of input in there. So I think it's good practice. But it's also very case by case dependent, right? For example, my code, when I'm thinking about a scenario of what my program is making, I am making a program for Pokemon. And the Pokemon, there's never a Pokemon that is less than one. So I know this has to be default one, right? So case by case basis, but I think it's always good idea to put a default in here. So you don't have empty or no values in your database. It's always good to have something there.
And if you don't put anything, it will just be blank. It won't be null. It'll just be like an empty.
You won't see anything if you don't put a default, but it will be stored as null.
Okay, cool.
All right. Now we added some new items into this. Let's remove these students. I'm making updates to my models, but my database is not tracking. Oh, my bad. Select all from Pokemon. We don't see the fields in here, right? That's because I have to make migrations. Any change that happens in my models need to be updated. So I'm going to say Python manage.py, make migrations, right? I have to make migrations before I migrate because these are new changes that were made to my model and they're not being tracked by my migration file. The only thing that's being tracked is what was originally there. So make migrations. And then we see here that the fields were added. My migration file now has another file here. It's the changes that were added to it. Notice that there's now dependencies here. This is dependent on my initial migration because it's tracking, hey, the initial migration you made did not have these, therefore these are dependent on the past migration you made because we're under the impression that these are new fields, kind of. Does that make sense? So we can go ahead and migrate. They were successful. And then we can select all from Pokemon app Pokemon, and we now see that my Pokemon has everything that it requires. All right, that was made for my Pokemon model. Do I have any questions about migrations or fields or no? All right. We'll take a pause here. All right, we're gonna go ahead and move forward, and we're gonna talk about one of the cool tools that comes with Django. And this is also part of the features of ORM. Right, just like PostgreSQL had an ability to use pSQL to interact with your PostgreSQL, we have a tool very similar to that. In that tool, let's open up a new terminal. I'm gonna turn on my virtual environment on this one. And I'm going to go to my Poke project. And for this next part of the class, the tool that I want to talk about is going to be the shell tool. I believe we run admin Django-admin. It should be within here. And I was correct. It is within here. It's one of the commands that we have access to us, and it's the shell command. And just like Python, when we install Python, right, we have access to a Python shell. If we were to type in Python, it opens up this shell here where I can say number is equal to 5, and I say print number plus 5, and it gives me 10, right? I can run like actual Python code within the shell. Django has something very similar. So we can run Python manage.py shell. And it's going to open up our Django shell. Now, within this Django shell, I'm going to create different data or objects for my database using the Pokemon models, right? It gives us access to all that, which is awesome. And to get that to work, what I have to do is I have to import the models that I created. So I'm going to say from Pokemon app dot models. I want to import Pokemon. Right, and what that does is it imports my class Pokemon, and it's going to allow me to create objects from this class. And I'm going to create Pikachu is equal to, I'm going to call the class. It's going to take a name, which is going to be Pikachu. I don't even have to give it a level, but I want to. I'm going to give it a level of 6. The date encounter has a default, capture has a default, and sodas description can be blank, so it's okay. We can go ahead and create this Pokemon, and I type in Pikachu, and it returns a Pokemon object. So we just created a Pikachu object off of the model that we have. Well, does that mean it's within my database? Well, let's see. We can say select all from Pokemon app Pokemon, and we see here that it currently does not exist in my database. Well, to add it to the database, we use a command called .save. So we're going to call our Pikachu object, and we're going to say .save, open and close parentheses. And now going back to my database, I can select all Pokemon app, and I currently now have one entry into my database of Pikachu level 6, and I have yet to capture him. Do I have any questions about the shell, how we activated it? Yes, one.
Not really a question. Can you just go back so I can see the code real quick
Absolutely.
in the shell? Thank you.
Besides one, does anyone have a question?
Yeah, actually, just really quick, why do we use the interactive console again? Why did we go into that instead to make the Pikachu variable? Is it just to show that we can do it that way?
It is one of the two ways that we do it, but essentially what this console does, it allows us to interact with our database, Postgres, so we can actually create data and work with our models to ensure it's doing what it should be doing, right? So it's part of the development process. This allows us to actually use our models in real time, create objects from them. We can make changes to them, as well as ensuring that Django is speaking to our database, right? So it allows us to load in our models from Django and create new Pokemon, right? And the reason we do this is because once we get into connecting Django with our React, and let's say I'm gonna use a previous application I used. I had a music application app, right? And if I wanted for my user to create a new playlist, they would put in a GET request to my backend, right? I'm sorry, not a GET request. They put in a post request, right? So they can create something. They would put in that request. It would come to Django. Django will receive this request. It would have the information that was given to it from the front end, right? Think about whenever you guys were using GET requests and you're given information like the ditto, right? Something very similar to that, where our front end will take in information from the user. We take that information and we will run something very similar to this, where we will create the object for that, and then we will return to them a playlist, right? In the backend, it's creating a playlist object, right, and saving it to the database, and then it's returning it to them. Hey, here's your playlist, right? this is essentially what our backend will be doing, but we have to test it out, and the shell allows us to do that to see it work in real time. Does that make sense to you, Sam? Sam?
Yep, makes sense.
Awesome. Right. So what this is telling me is that this is working, right? Why do we open up the shell and run it anyways? Just to see if it works? No, right? If we try to do something like, let's go back to our model. I'm going to say that the name has to be unique equals to true, right? When I come back to my shell, unfortunately, I have to import again or make the changes. So I have to come here and make migrations, migrate. Now that is now updated in my database. So anytime I make a change in my model, I have to make migrations. It migrates. When I come back to my shell, I'm going to go ahead and import my updated Pokemon model. I'm going to create Pikachu 2 is equal to Pokemon. I'm going to create a new class. This one is going to also be called Pikachu. And I want him to be a level of 12. And what happens is, I believe, oh no, I didn't want to get to that yet. Let's see if it works. Okay, there we go. I run my, oh, I didn't do the right one. I did Pikachu 2.save. There we go. That's what I was hoping for. Right. I try to save my new Pikachu and I got an error. Right. It says key name equals Pikachu already exists. Right. That tells me that my constraint unique is working. Right. And that's the purpose of the shell, to test out the models that you're creating, that not only is it working, right? Can you use your models, give it the information, but is it adhering to the constraints, or what we will call later validators that you set to your models, right? If something has to be unique, when you go and create a duplicate of it and try to use a unique value, it shouldn't work, right? If you're receiving input on a field that shouldn't be in that field, it should not work, right? Later, when we get more into it, if you are taking a email address and it's not in the format of the email, we're going to test out the validators that we will manually create, and it should not work, right? That is the point of the shell, so we can ensure that we can test out our models, our validators, and it's doing what it should be doing, right? Do I have any questions of how to open up the shell and import our models in here? All right, let's go ahead and continue with this. I'm going to go ahead and go back to Pikachu 2, and I'm going to change this to Charizard. This one will be named Charizard, and I'm going to give this one a level of 32. This one will have capture is equal to true, and description is equal to a big orange dragon with a bad temper. We can say Charizard.save. Go back to our database and select all, and Charizard is successfully in here. Notice that what happened here. The ID is 3. That's because I tried to create a different one. It gave me an error because of the ID, and this is the third time that I try to create something else, so the ID incremented, right? So the sequence still runs. That's okay. There's not something to fret about, even though your IDs don't match in order. But just know that it will do that for you. But I was able to successfully add Charizard within here. Well, now I have 2 different Pokemons in here. and we are able to do queries within our shell. We can say Pokemon dot objects dot all, and we see that it queries all the Pokemon objects that I currently have saved. I can say all Pokemon is equal to Pokemon dot objects dot all. Let's go with all Pokemon, and let's try to grab the first one. I get Pokemon object 1. Let's do dot name, and I get Pikachu. All right, we can do queries and get back query sets of all the objects that we have within here. Does anyone have any questions of how I was able to query multiple Pokemons? Yes, Owen.
I have a question for before that. Before you input Charizard into your Pokemon object, what did you have to go into that Pokemon class? Because for some reason I'm getting name Pokemon is not defined when I try to do that.
If you closed out your shell or made changes to your model, you will have to re-import your Pokemon class. I believe when I made a change, right, I changed the name to unique equals true. Notice that I have to run from Pokemon app.models, import Pokemon again, right? The shell isn't smart enough to realize that you made a change. There are extensions that can actually do that for you. If you guys want to look into that allow you with this process in Django. I don't have those extensions. I can look into it later and give them to you. But because I made a change, I had to re-import that. Did that solve your issue? Was that your issue?
I think my file path is my issue. What's your file path on your shells right here?
I am currently within the manage.py directory, so I'm in the same level as where my manage.py is. That's where I opened up my shell, and it should be as simple as Pokemon app.models because that's the next level below.
Okay, thank you. I think that's what my issue is.
Okay. All right. So we were able to grab that. Any other questions beside Owen? All right. So going back to our Pokemon, we got this, weird Pokemon object stuff. We're able to add other methods within here. Just like we did in OOP, we can say define double under and taking self, and we can return a for that can say self dot name, and we can say where's that? What do we want to say? I'll just make it up. We can say self dot description is equal to no, we can say if captured. What am I trying to do? Captured equal to false. I need self. Self dot capture self or equal to false. I want to say not yet captured. It's not liking this. I haven't done this in a while. Someone help me out here.
maybe self dot captured is not.
Captured is not yet captured. You're a genius to win. Else
I would have never thought of that.
has been not liking it. Else has been captured.
I don't think I was right. I'm not really good with Python ternaries.
It's okay. I had it written down because I always forget this.
Might be able to put the exclamation point right before self dot captured and eliminate the is not.
I don't think Python.
If you're
takes
doing
exclamation point.
are you doing a ternary right now?
Yeah.
So it'd be self dot captured and then question mark to check the boolean.
I
And
think it's
then
gonna be
if it's true, then it's captured, and then you have to make an else if it's not.
Python don't do the question mark.
if
Oh, it don't?
self dot captured. Yeah, it does not do the question.
Yeah,
Oh,
it
it
doesn't do
does.
the
Yeah.
question mark.
So it does do the exclamation point. Sorry about that.
Now you captured is so captured else. There we go. Teamwork makes the dream work, baby. All right, there we go. I'm sorry. I go between JavaScript and Python sometimes, and it becomes very conflicting. So not yet captured. If self captured, else has been captured, or would that be backwards? I think that'd be backwards. You say has been captured. If self captured, I think has not been captured. It's all right. We'll make it work. So we just made a change here. What do we need to do, guys?
Migrate.
Migrate. I don't know. I don't think the define string needs to be migrated. It did not. No. But just for my own sanity, minus.py migrate. So it looks like if it's not a direct change to the field types, the migrations doesn't really make a difference. But what will make a difference is our shell. We have to re-import this class because there's something new to it. Even though the field did not change, we had to say from Pokemon app dot Pokemon, or no, it's models import Pokemon. There we go. And I believe I can say Pikachu still. All right, let me exit out. It is a little tedious, I will say, guys, to have to work with the shell. I wasn't the biggest fan of it, but it is super helpful. So from Pokemon app dot models import Pokemon. We can say Pokemon dot objects dot all. I don't have to recreate anything. Why? Well, because I already created them before. There is existing Pokemon within my database, and what the queries do, these queries are directly querying your database. It's not just pulling this out of thin air, right? Because your Django and your database are connected. Even though I re-imported the module, I had to restart the shell. I can do Pokemon.objects.all. This goes into my database. It grabs all the objects that are Pokemon and returns them to me. Notice how Pokemon Pikachu has not been captured. Charizard has been captured. I did it correct. We can say Pokemon, let's say Charizard. If I do want to have an existing variable in here while the shell is open, I do have to assign it though. And I want to grab Charizard, and it gives me that Pokemon Charizard. Do I have any questions on the string? All right. Well, down here, I'm going to go ahead and add another method. We should probably have a method that allows us to maybe level up, right? we're gonna say level up Pokemon. This is gonna take in self, and what it'll do is it'll increase my level field by 1. And let's see how that works. Okay, re-import my models. Grab Charizard again. Print out Charizard. Now let's do Charizard dot level up Pokemon. He has no attribute called level up.
You need to return it.
No, I don't have to return anything. So the reason I don't have to return anything, because this is just going to increment my level up,
Okay.
right? So by calling the method, it incremented my level, but I'm trying to, but it didn't like the attribute level up.
Did you migrate?
I did not. I think it's because it wants me to close out this terminal, guys. Unfortunately, from Pokemon app.models import Pokemon. Charizard is equal to Pokemon.objects.all. Grab index 1. Charizard. It's there. Let's do dot level up. Oh, my bad. Oh my god. It's gonna drive me crazy. There we go. It wanted me to close out the shell, right? It's very picky. So I opened it up. I imported my Pokemon class. I grabbed Charizard and I ran level up now. And now it didn't give me the error. But if I call Charizard dot level, we see that it's 33. Well, initially I had set it to 32. So level up worked, right? It increased my level. But when I come back to PSQL, if I do select all from Pokemon, Charizard is still 32. Who can guess what?
Because you still got to save it to the database.
Yeah, we still got to save it to the database, right? It exists within here. It did it, but my database isn't tracking it. We could essentially do something like self.save here, or we could do it in the shell. We'll leave it in there for now in the models.py. And then when I run this, I can import my Pokemon, get my Charizard, level it up. I can see my Charizard dot level, it's 33. I rerun it in my database and it worked in my database right now. Right, so the level up worked. It made the change thanks to the self.save, right? Now, when it comes to querying, it is in documentation as well. You guys can go to the Django documentation to the making queries. We come down here, we have the creating objects. It shows you how you have to import from the models the class that you want to import and calling the class, passing in the arguments. Where are these arguments coming from? Well, they gave you kind of like a demo of whatever the scenario is. They have right here blog, author, and entry. Blog has name and tagline. And that's what they're passing in here. That was saved into the variable called b, and then use the b.save, right? Also notice is that this performs an insert sequence statement. When working with our shell and using the .save, we essentially said insert into our Pokemon app, Pokemon table, whatever, this is, right? That's essentially what we are doing. The part of creating an object for it, remember back to the insert, we said insert into this table, and we also said values, right? In PostgreSQL, it was all on one line. It was very deliberate. We told it, hey, do this in here with this. With the shell, it's a little bit different because we are working with Python in classes. We have to create an object because it's Python classes. So we create the object, and then the .save does the import for us, or the inserts, right? It takes that object as the values, and it inserts it into the table that it belongs, right? It's that smart that it knows the table because of the type of model that it is, right? Thanks also to like the migrations and ORM overall as a concept. Saving changes to objects. So notice here, they added a new name and they ran the .save, very similar to how we changed like the level, and or the description and stuff like that, right? We'll talk about foreign keys in many fields at a different time. Let's see, grabbing your objects or retrieving all your objects. We saw that today using the Pokemon, right? That's the entry here. That's one of their models. They have an entry model. So they call the model .objects.all, and that'll return to you all your objects. There's some different parameters that you can use. We can also do different forms of filtering within their objects. So we're able to, very similar to how we did in PostgreSQL, where we say, hey, select, all the cars from the car table where the year is less than or greater than 2019, and they return those values. That's essentially what this filter command is doing. And we can kind of see that in play, where we can kind of come back here into our shell, and we can say P1 is equal to Pokemon.objects.all.filter. And what do I want to filter? I want to say where my level is equal to 1. That should return to us Pikachu. We can say P1. Oh, it got us nothing. Okay, it hates me. How do I fix this? Select. Why is it not liking the dot filter?
Pikachu is level 6.
Is it? Oh, it is. Thank you. I was wondering, like, what's going on? What did I do wrong? Going back to my shell, say level 6, P1. There we go. And we could do some sophisticated querying like that, right? What is this doing? Well, it's the same as we did. It's like saying select, all from Pokemon app underscore Pokemon, right? That's my table where level is equal to 6, right? If we were using the syntax when we work with PostgreSQL, that's essentially what the querying is doing here within the shell, right? Django has its own way of doing it because it's once again Python based and it's talking to the database. And there's a way of doing it in PostgreSQL, but essentially under the hood, that's what Django is doing. It is querying and grabbing it depending on what the filter is. We have query sets. We talked about that. We can also grab items with the .get method, right? And I really enjoy the .get method, right? We can say P1 is equal to Pokemon.objects.get. I want to grab something where the ID is equal to 1. And we can say P1, it grabs, well, actually, let's change that because they already have Pikachu. Let's do Charizard. So we're going to say ID 3. We print it out and it gives us Charizard. But what's cool about this, about get methods, if you guys don't already know, is the fact that we can give it an alternate return statement in case it doesn't find something. So we're gonna say, hey, I want you to grab something with the ID of 4. And if you don't find it, then return none. I guess it doesn't like it here. That's unfortunate. All right, disregard what I said. It'll work later whenever we start working with reviews. But I guess we don't have the option to give it something like that. But instead of doing .all, where we got a query set, at least you can specify exactly what you are looking for. Right? Not just name, it can or ID, it can also be name, pass in a string, Pikachu, give it P1, and it gives it Pikachu. We already had Pikachu in there, so let's say Charizard. And it gives us Charizard, right? So one way of querying it was using objects.all, right? It gave us everything within a set. We were able to use the dot filter method where we choose it depending on a certain parameter, or we can use the get method to get something very specific, whether it's by the name or if it matches like capture status, stuff like that, right? Yes, James.
Is there a specific reason why I just keep sending back the message like Charizard has been captured, Pokemon has not been captured?
Yes.
Why is it not?
Great question, James. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. That was rude of me. Going back to the Pokemon model, we created this default string method. This is what's known as a dunder method, right? What we did is we essentially overrided the what we get back whenever we try to print an object, right? Earlier, before we had that, it was just printing out like Pokemon object, and that's all it said, right? But that didn't really tell us much. So we're able to give it a default message where we can return the name as well as a nice like full message whether it was captured or not, depending on a certain condition. And that's all formatted within a string, and that's why it returns this to us.
Gotcha. I forgot about that. Sorry about that.
It's okay. All right. So let's go ahead. We'll create one more Pokemon. We're gonna say P2 is equal to Pokemon. I want to create let me look at my models. We're gonna say name is equal to total dial, the OG. We'll give it a level of 9. And we're definitely gonna capture this one. So captured is equal to true. P2.save. Let's double check that it's within our database, and total dial is within here. Now, we have 3 different Pokemons. And the next thing I want to talk about is going to be fixtures. What are fixtures? Where's it at? So fixtures, right? Essentially what fixtures are is a record of our data. So what if we wanted to, for whatever reason, share our data with somebody else, or if for whatever reason we had to drop our database and we wanted to save our data somewhere so we don't lose it, right? If we're moving our database to a different environment, but we don't want to lose our data, fixtures allows us a way to save our data, right? And we can back it up by using the following method. So what we are going to do is within our Python terminal, let's close out some of these tabs. I have some data already. And what I want to do is all right. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a directory within my Pokemon app, right? So I currently have data for my Pokemon app, right? It's 3 different Pokemon with their own fields. So within this Pokemon app, right, for the data that belongs to specifically this app, I'm going to create a new folder. and I'm going to call it fixtures. Right, and it's important that you call it fixtures. Don't just call it, JSON data. Don't call it anything else. Because there's some Django magic that's happening here. And it's going to look for a folder called fixtures when working with this. Right, that's going to be a directory where we can add our data to. And what we are going to do is we're going to call the Python manage.py file. And what I am going to do is call the dump data method. This should be a little familiar to you guys. Is that correct? Have you guys seen dump data and load data before? Awesome. Dump data is going to allow us to grab all the data from our database and drop it within our fixtures file. So we say dump data. Well, where do I want to dump it from? I want to dump it from Pokemon app.model. I'm gonna go ahead and run that. Okay, did not like that.
Do you have to insert the Pokemon model at some point?
No. Model name, Pokemon app. Maybe it wants Pokemon. Pokemon app. Figure right away. Pokemon. There we go. All right, we did Python manage.py dump data, Pokemon app, Pokemon. And it did not like that. Oh, that's why I didn't do it right. So what this did is it dumped all the data. And I hope it didn't get rid of it from my database. I don't think it did. Okay, good. It grabbed all the data from the Pokemon app model and it dumped it in my terminal, right? And we see it here. It looks pretty cool. We got everything that we wanted. It's not that pretty. So what I'm going to do is give it a parameter and say indent. And then I want to indent it too. And when we run it again, it formats it to how we usually see JSON data, right? It's all nicely indented and formatted so we can visually read it, right? So what did we just do? Small recap. We ran the Python manage.py file, right? That's the command that we use to run everything within our project. We called the dump data method. I'm saying, hey, I want you to just dump all this data to me. Just give it all. Everything that you have. Well, from where? Well, from the Pokemon app.model, right? And that was able to give me.
I thought that one didn't work.
My
I
bad.
thought it was the.
You're right. The
yeah.
Pokemon app, Pokemon. Thank you, James. You're ahead of me. Good stuff. Yeah. I want to grab it from the Pokemon app.pokemon, right? That's where I want the data from. And it did. It gave it to me in a very condensed version. I did not like that. So I ran that again. And this time I added indent to the very end of it, giving me this formatted data. Well, it's in my terminal here. I can see that the command's working. Let me clear this up. I'm going to call that method again. But this time I'm going to give it a location. Right, this time I wanted to go into the Pokemon app inside of fixtures. Right, and if I run this, oh, that's another thing. Django does not like the forward slashes, so it gave me an issue. When it's talking about file path, it's gonna want the dot notation. So Pokemon app dot fixtures. It still did not like that. Error unrecognized argument. Pokemon app fixtures.
Do you have to add a file in fixtures?
Yeah, I think it's gonna want
Add
dot.
JSON.
Was that why it was giving me the issue? Fixtures / Pokemon fixtures.json. It's not liking that here. Why are you yelling at me? unrecognized arguments, Pokemon app fixtures. Okay. Well, maybe instead of trying to do this from memory, I check the lecture. Give me a second, guys, to try to debug this real quick. Okay. That's what I did wrong. I didn't give it the forward arrow or the gradient. Sorry, I was moving a lot of stuff in my Linux terminal, and we don't use the less than or greater than to dump stuff. You kind of just give it the pop back. So I was kind of stuck there. Okay, there we go. We ran it. We have Python max.py dump data. I told it the Pokemon app model. I reformatted the Pokemon URL to be specific to Pokemon app, the fixtures folder, and then the name of the Pokemon fixtures JSON file. It wanted the greater than to show it or to point towards to where it should be dumping the data. And we can open this up and we see that our data was added neatly within a JSON file. So does that mean my data is gone? It should not be gone. It should all be here. But what we can do now is we can do something like drop database. I want to drop the Pokédex DB. Oh, I am within my terminal. So drop DB Pokédex DB. It's taking a moment. There's two other sessions using Pokédex right now. Let's close out my other terminals. There we go. I didn't like it because my shell was accessing the database, so I close it out. We can create DB. I'm going to recreate my database. Let's open this up again. I'm going to connect to my Pokédex database. I'll do /D. I have no relations. And now what I can do is load up my data back within my database by using the Python manage.py command. And instead of dump data, I'm going to say load data. Load data. Well, what data do I want to load? It's going to be the Pokemon data or Pokemon fixtures.json. Now, hey, Roger, you didn't add a file path this time. Like, why did you not tell it where it should be going to? Well, that's the purpose of the name of our folder, which is called fixtures. Back to the whole Django magic. Django looks for a folder called fixtures, and that's how it knows where to get it from. So it's very important that you actually call it fixtures. Now, before I keep talking, let's actually make sure it works. And it says there's an issue with my primary key. Oh, who can guess why this isn't working? What did I do? I dropped my database. There's nothing in there. And then I recreated it. I tried to dump my data back in there. Why am I getting this issue here where I could not load my data in there?
Migration, maybe?
Migrations. Thank you, Juan. Yeah, so we dumped it in there, but if we go back to my database, if I do /D, there's nothing in there, right? It's not tracking the default tables that come with Django. It's not tracking the Pokemon table. So I have to ensure that I make those migrations. So I'm gonna go Python manage.py. Do I have to call make migrations or migrate?
Make migrations, then migrate.
Not exactly. The make migrations is like an add and commit. It creates the record for it, the log, and makes that folder, right? That still doesn't have anything to do with the database. That's what Django uses to actually add it to the database. So the migrations folder has already been created. There's already a log of what should be in this database. So all I have to do is call migrate. As a matter of fact, I can even do make migration to show you that it's going to say no changes detected, right? So I'm gonna say Python manage.py migrate, and it's gonna add all those tables back into my database. We can say /d, and once again, everything's in here, as well as my Pokemon table. And now I can load the data in there, and we have installed 3 objects from 1 fixture. We can return back to my database, and I can say select all from Pokemon app Pokemon, and then once a semicolon, and we see here that I successfully loaded my fixtures. Do I have any questions about fixtures, how to create them, or how to load them back into our database? No questions at all. I see a bunch of messages about like my brain right now being fried. Like there's obviously something that you guys might have questions about. Does anyone have anything at all? Yes, Tristan.
Just real quick, like a confirmation, at least for myself, whenever you're dumping data, the line of code that you put into the shell to dump the data, is it the like the first part of it is basically like the prerequisite of like what you want to dump in, and then after that you put the right arrow to say this is where I want you to path to?
Exactly. Yes. That's why I was getting some issues, right? Let's go with dump data. Let's open this up, right? I said Python max.py. I want to dump data. Well, where do I want to dump this data from? The Pokemon app.pokemon. I did model last time and it gave me an issue. It wanted to know exactly what model, right? So it took the model name, right? This right here was just some formatting. It's not required, but if I didn't add this, we would get that collapsed version of JSON, which isn't really readable. So first part is, what do you want to dump? All right, thank you. Where do you want to dump it to? And then you give it to where you want to dump it, right? The issue that I was getting is because I wasn't using that arrow. So I was keep trying to do it. Like, I don't want to know where to send it. What are you saying? So I had to add that arrow. That's where I was going wrong. Anybody else? All right, we're gonna move on to the last part of class, and then we will do a small recap of everything that we did. And I'll leave the floor open for questions. I know it might seem like a lot. So the next part is going to be talking about the Django admin shell. I believe we have a part of the PowerPoint here. We do not. All right, going back to this. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is going to be the Django admin shell and the admin site. So we saw everything about the admin shell earlier, right? How we were able to create stuff within the shell and test our models. That is one tool that I said you guys have to your, for your toolkit. But there's also another way of doing it, which some of you guys might actually prefer. And this is how we did it when I was coming through. The curriculum changed a lot more, and now it shifted more towards the shell. And the reason for that is because of everything you can do with querying. The admin site does not give you the option to do all these like fancy queried and grabbing of objects in the way that it does. But what the admin site does give you is a nice GUI, graphical user interface, right? And to use our admin shell, it's going to take a little bit of setup. but nothing too complex, right? So for this, what we have to do is we are going to navigate to our Pokemon app admin file, right? So in our Pokemon app, we already talked about models. This time we're going to be looking at our I'm sorry, English is hard. Our admin.py. So open up admin.py, and you're gonna see there's nothing here, but there is a comment that says register your models here, right? So the admin site exists, but it doesn't know what models it has, right? And we'll take a pause on the admin site. Before I connect our app, what I'm going to do is actually open up our admin site. I'm going to run the actual Django server. We're going to run Python manage.py, and just like you did like run dev, this is run server. It's going to run the Django server in port 8000, right? We see it's working. I can click this link, and it's going to send me to a location that looks like this, right? It's at port 8000. It's working right. This is coming from the admin application that's installed that comes with Django. If we go back to our settings, right, there's some apps that come with it, one of them being the admin one. And that's this little thing, right? If we go to our URL at the very end, we'll put a / and we can type in admin, and it'll take us to the admin site for it, right? This is what the login for our admin site is, but we don't have a username or password yet to log in, and we have to create that. So to create it, what we are going to do is we're going to go back to our terminal. I'm going to stop this from running real quick. You could just do it in a different terminal if you guys like to. But I am going to run the command Python manage.py create super user. Right. This is going to do exactly what it sounds like. It's going to create an admin account that has the ability to let you run the admin side, delete stuff, and so on and so forth. When you press it, it's going to prompt you with your choices for username, password, and even email. I'm going to use my regular username, or the guards at 12. I'm going to use my Platoon email. And then for password, I'll just call it password, which you can't see, just for lesson purposes. And then I will put it in again. Okay, whatever. This is too common. To bypass the password validation and create the user anyways, I'm going to put in the Y for yes. And it says super user created successfully. Well, I have my super user. Now I actually have to connect my application. So back to my admin site. Within the admin site, I'm going to import my Pokemon model. So I'm going to say from .models import Pokemon. And actually, before I show you what it looks like, let's go back to our admin site. We had that super user. I'm going to go ahead and log in, give it my password, and oh, I'm not running the server. I had turned off the server, so I have to rerun it. Run server. It's opened up. Let's go ahead and refresh this. And we now see the admin site for Django. We have stuff like groups, which I don't know what this is, but this is like for groups of users. The users that we have individually, I have one super user as my username and address. Staff status, we can click the user, we can reset passwords, give it more information, and so on and so forth. So Django provides this for you with the installation, right? last login, state join, but I don't see my Pokemon model. Well, going back to the Django admin, in here, what I'm going to say is admin.sites.register. Roger, where are you getting this command? This is straight from the documentation. For you guys, it's already been provided for you. It's in the curriculum. But if you want to know more about this, you can check the documentation. After register, I'm going to open and close parentheses, and I'm going to add my model in here. And notice I have to add it within a list. All right, so the register function takes a list of models, and I'm passing in the Pokemon model. All right, because I only have one model right now. And now if I come back to my admin site, I can refresh the page, and I now see Pokemon app is within my admin sites. I can click on Pokemons, and I have 3 different Pokemons as well as their description. Totodile has been captured, Charizard, Pikachu. I can click on a Pokemon, and I can add a description, a big alligator with a big appetite. All right, I can save it. And when I come to my database, I can select all from Pokemon. I can't type to save my life. And we now see that Totodile had the description updated where earlier it did not. All right, so my admin site allows me to work with my database and create new objects. Right. Once again, you ask yourself, well, why didn't you show us this first, Roger, making us go to the shell? Well, once again, as cool as the admin site is, there's stuff in the terminal that you can do that you can't do with the admin site, like all these fancy querying and so on and so forth. The admin site is available to you guys. You guys can use it if it helps you guys create a bunch of these real quickly. We can also delete stuff, right? I can increment the level. I can make this 20. I can change the date that it was encountered. And I can save it. Let's delete. Let's actually create a new one. This will be Bulbasaur of level 3. He is captured. I'm going to save it. Go back to my database. Query it once again. We have Bulbasaur. Notice that Totodile is now level 30. I did change the date that he was encountered. It's working as it should. Let's delete one now. We're going to delete Bulbasaur because he's too low to be in my Pokemon team. I go to actions and I'm going to choose delete selected Pokemon. It's going to ask me, am I sure? I'm going to say yes. Go back to my database, and he is no longer present, right? So everything that I was able to do, which within my shell, I can do the exact same on my admin site, right? With a nice graphical user interface. Yes, James.
Does this also update the JSON file and fixtures, or you still have to update that
The
yourself?
fixtures file has to be updated manually, very similar to requirements, right? When we call requirements, it had everything at that place of time. But when we install CyclePG, I had to re-update it. So fixtures, if we were to go to it, it does not have the other Pokemon. It has Totodile. He still has level 9, the same date encountered, right? So fixtures now upload. That's not connected in any shape, way, or form. Good
Cool.
question. Does anybody have any questions about the admin site? Whether how to create a super user, how to register an application, how to use the admin site, or the differences between the admin site and the shell?
Is the admin site usually used in industry, or is it something like just like kind of like a nice to have? Like, do you usually use just the shell in general, or do you just or do people actually use the admin site to like visualize everything?
They use it. It's personal preference, as I mentioned. Right? It's whatever you want to use and what you want to use within it, right? So it's personal preference. You guys are more than welcome to use both. We teach the shell first because it has a lot more power personally. The admin site looks nice. It's there for you guys. You can use it if you want to create a bunch of them, multiple Pokemon objects in succession. You could do it that way. I know it could be kind of tedious to do it in the shell. But both of them are good. As I mentioned to you guys, when I learned Django, we used the Django admin site more than we use the shell. But now we changed it because of what you can do with the shell. Yes, Juan.
On that note, creating like for manually creating these data sets or whatever, is this good for like, for example, if you're making your own Pokemon game that isn't Pokemon, it's something else, and you're hand creating all these items, you would normally use something like the GUI to make a bunch of these in rapid succession for like a game, for example?
If I was doing this for a game, I think the route I would take would be I would download a CSV that is already made because I'm sure they're like if you were to check the Pokemon API, they probably have like the ability to download the raw JSON stuff. I would download a CSV, right? And then I would create my models to take in the information that I want and then like load it in there. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I'm saying like pragmatically, if you wanted to make like an original game, for example, this is how you would go about creating all that data, right?
Well, it depends, right? Because gaming and a full stack web application, like a website, right, are two different things. This is one way. If you were doing it with like a web application, yes. If you want to make an original, unique one, you would do it this way. Essentially, the way that is working, right? If I gave you a scenario, let's say I'm creating back to my old scenario, I'm creating a music discovery app, a Spotify. What I did was I used a third-party API from Spotify to access their already built library of songs, right? So whenever a user created an account with me, they had their own default library, and they were able to find songs. I, on my backend, was referencing the Spotify API to get songs for them. And then they would save it to their customized playlist on my application. And then every time someone got a new song that I did not have in my database, I would just save it. So I did that so I don't have to recreate everything. So there's ways of doing it where you don't have to recreate all this data manually to create something. If you're creating a website that sells certain things, then yes, you would do it manually, right? Let's say you have your own store that you're trying to sell shoes. You might want to create new data for the new stuff that you have in stock, stuff like that, right? Does that make sense? Right? You might want to make like a function on your front end where you're like, I want to, add new stuff to my inventory. And what that does is like you put in parameters like I want to create, I want to add 20 new pairs of shoes, right? This is the names of the shoes and so on and so forth. And then you put in a post request to your backend and it'll go and it'll recreate all these objects all at once. So as of right now, we're doing it step by step by step, very tedious, but there's ways to create multiple of these very quickly, right? And you'll see that once we connect our front end to our back end. Does that make sense to you? It's almost like querying in Pokemon, or Pokemon or querying these APIs where you're like, hey, let me get 20 entries back, right? And we were able to get 20 entries back. Well, you could do something very similar to that where you can create multiple of them at the same time, if that makes sense. Right? You don't have to do it like this individually.
Yeah, so simply put, if it's too unique and you can't find a data reference point, you would have to make these manually. Otherwise, you can try to use like how you did with the API for Spotify, use an API to get your data and then manipulate it through here to put in your database, right?
That's
Okay.
what I did. You know, it depends on the purpose of your application and what you're trying to do, right? I think part of your personal projects will require you to have to use a third-party API, if I remember correctly. So, you know, you'll learn how to do that too. We'll talk about using third-party APIs during the Django course. So we'll talk about it actually next week. So you'll learn how to do that. But yeah, it is part of the process. Does that answer your question? Awesome. Does anybody else have any questions about anything that we covered? Excuse me, I didn't mean to burp. Okay, all right, from the top. So we talked about a lot today, guys. We went over. Let me bring in my browser. Our intro to ORM. We talked about creating the virtual environment, so we can isolate our project into a small container. We created our project using the install Django, you know, Django start project. We create different applications. We learned how to save the dependencies of our project into a requirements.txt. We talked about the setup of our Pokemon project, whether it entail connecting the database or installing our applications into our project. So we went through the entire setup of that. We talked about CyclePG and it being an adapter. That way Django was able to communicate with our database. We talked about models, how to create models using the model class. We talked about the fields, the different types of fields and constraints that you might add to them. We discussed migrations and how to migrate, make the changes to our database. We went through a thorough discussion with our console in how to query as well as make different objects for our database. And then finally, we talked about our, the fixtures and the admin site, right? Whether we want to dump data, load data, and we talked about how to use the admin site over the shell. Do I have any questions that was covered throughout today's class? All right, if I have no further questions, I'm going to stop the recording now.